The explosion at the dam echoed across the valley like thunder. For a moment, everything went silent. Then came the roar. Water. A wall of dark, violent water rushed down the canyon, smashing trees like toothpicks and ripping apart everything in its path. Cars, fences, debris, and bodies were carried away in the raging flood. Marcus stood on the ridge with the others, breathing heavily. His ears rang from the blast. Below them, the valley they had crossed just hours earlier was disappearing under the rising river. The dam was gone. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. They simply watched. Then Elena whispered, "Did we do the right thing?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon. The massive horde that had been chasing them was gone, swallowed by the floodwaters. Thousands of zombies had been wiped out in seconds. But victory didn't feel like victory. "Maybe," Marcus finally said. "But we also just changed this entire valley." The water kept rising, filling roads, fields, and the small town below. Behind them, Daniel climbed the hill carrying the radio they had salvaged earlier. The device crackled weakly. "I'm picking up signals again," he said. Everyone turned. "That means people," Daniel replied. "Someone survived." Hope flickered through the group for the first time in days. But then something moved far below in the flooded valley. At first Marcus thought it was debris drifting in the water. Then it moved again. Bodies. The flood had not destroyed all of them. Hundreds of zombies were still moving through the water, dragged by the current but still alive, still hunting. Marcus exhaled slowly. "They're floating." Elena frowned. "That's impossible." But it wasn't. The infected didn't drown. They simply drifted. And the river was carrying them straight toward the lowlands, toward every survivor settlement downstream. Marcus felt a cold realization settle in his chest. "We didn't just stop the horde," he said quietly. "We moved it." The survivors moved fast. The explosion had drawn attention, and Marcus knew it wouldn't be long before other infected started wandering toward the valley. Their small convoy of 2 trucks and a battered SUV climbed the narrow mountain road away from the flooded basin. The road was cracked and partially collapsed in places, forcing them to move slowly. Daniel drove the lead truck while Marcus stood in the bed, scanning the forest with binoculars. The trees were too quiet. Normally, the infected made noise, distant groans, snapping branches, dragging footsteps. But the woods around them felt empty. That was worse. It meant the infected was somewhere else. Behind them, Elena drove the second truck carrying supplies they had salvaged from the dam facility: fuel, tools, batteries, and a small solar generator. For the first time in weeks, they had something close to real resources. But survival in this world was never simple. Marcus spotted something ahead. "Stop!" Daniel slammed the brakes. The convoy halted just before a bend in the road. Marcus jumped down and walked forward carefully. At first he thought the road had collapsed again. Then he realized what he was looking at. Cars. Dozens of them. Abandoned vehicles blocked the mountain pass, rusted sedans, trucks, even a burned bus lying sideways across the road. A graveyard of the old world. Elena stepped out behind him. "Traffic jam," she muttered. Marcus studied the scene carefully. The doors of most vehicles were open, which meant the people inside had run or been dragged out. Could be clear, Daniel said. Marcus shook his head. No. He pointed toward the bus. A hand slowly slid across one of the dusty windows. Then a face appeared. Gray skin. Empty eyes. The infected were still inside the vehicles. Dozens of them. Trapped for months. And now they had just noticed fresh prey. Marcus stepped back slowly. Behind the glass, the first zombie slammed into the bus window with a heavy thud. Then another. And another. The sound echoed through the silent mountains. Elena raised her rifle. Looks like we're not driving through this. Marcus nodded. No. He stared at the blocked road stretching ahead. We're clearing it. Marcus studied the line of abandoned vehicles blocking the mountain pass. The road twisted between steep cliffs and thick forest, leaving no easy way around. If they wanted to keep moving north, they had to clear it. Inside the rusted cars and the old bus, the trapped infected were becoming more active. They had heard the trucks. They had smelled the living. Hands slammed against windows. Glass rattled. One of the bus windows cracked slightly. Elena looked at Marcus. If that glass breaks, we're going to have 50 of them on us at once. Marcus nodded. Which is why we don't let it break. Daniel opened the back of the truck and pulled out a metal toolbox. Inside were tools they had taken from the dam maintenance garage. Marcus grabbed a heavy sledgehammer. The others looked at him. You're not seriously going to? Yes, Marcus said calmly. He walked toward the nearest car. Inside, a zombie sat in the driver's seat, its face pressed against the steering wheel, dried blood covering the dashboard. As Marcus approached, the creature suddenly snapped upright and slammed its head against the glass. Marcus raised the hammer. One swing. The side window exploded inward. The infected lunged out of the car. Marcus stepped back and drove the hammer down into its skull. The creature collapsed instantly. Behind him, Elena and Daniel started opening car doors one by one. Each time they did, another trapped infected crawled or stumbled out. And each time, the survivors were ready. Gunshots cracked through the mountains. Metal tools crushed skulls. The road slowly filled with still bodies. But the real problem was the bus. Dozens of infected were inside, pressing against the windows like a wall of gray flesh. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. We need another plan for that. Daniel pointed toward the fuel cans in the truck. Marcus understood immediately. Fire. Elena hesitated. That could spread to the forest. Marcus looked at the dry grass around the road. Then we make it fast. They rolled one of the old cars toward the bus and poured gasoline across the ground between them. Marcus lit a flare. The infected inside the bus pounded harder against the glass. He tossed the flare. The ground erupted in flames. Within seconds the fire spread under the bus and into the engine compartment. Black smoke rose into the sky. Inside the vehicle, the trapped infected began to burn. The survivors stepped back, watching the flames swallow the rusted bus. The road would be open soon. But Marcus knew something else. Smoke like that could be seen for miles. And in this world, smoke always brought trouble. The fire burned hotter than Marcus expected. Within minutes the entire bus was engulfed in flames, black smoke pouring into the sky like a signal flare for the end of the world. Inside the vehicle, the infected creatures shrieked and slammed against the windows as the heat grew unbearable. One window shattered. A burning zombie stumbled out onto the road. Its clothes were already gone, skin black and blistered, but it kept moving. Elena raised her rifle and fired. The bullet dropped it instantly. But the others inside the bus were still thrashing. Marcus grabbed Daniel's shoulder. "We're leaving as soon as the road clears." Daniel nodded. The fire continued eating through the old metal frame until finally the bus structure weakened. With a loud crash, the side of the vehicle collapsed inward. Burning bodies spilled onto the road. The survivors quickly moved the last few wrecked cars aside. The path was finally open. Marcus jumped back into the truck. "Go!" The convoy rolled forward, passing the smoking remains of the bus. Marcus looked back through the rear window as they drove away. The fire behind them was still rising higher. And in the distance, far across the forest, he thought he saw movement. Too far away to be sure. But if the infected had seen that smoke, they would come. By sunset the convoy had traveled nearly 20 kilometers into the mountains. Marcus finally called for a stop. They found a small clearing surrounded by thick pine trees, hidden from the road and difficult to see from a distance. Perfect for the night. Daniel parked the trucks while Elena set up a small perimeter alarm using empty cans and fishing wire. Old-world technology. But it still worked. Marcus climbed onto a rock overlooking the valley. Below them, far in the distance, he could still see the faint smoke from the burning bus. The wind carried the smell of ash through the forest. Elena joined him quietly. "You think anyone else saw that?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Finally he nodded. "Something probably did." She sat beside him, staring out at the darkening horizon. "For the first time in months, I thought we were ahead of them," she said. Marcus understood what she meant. They had destroyed the horde. They had escaped the dam. They had supplies again. But the world never stayed quiet for long. Daniel's voice suddenly called from the camp. "Marcus, the radio." Marcus jumped down and hurried over. The old radio unit was sitting on the hood of the truck, its speaker crackling with static. Then a voice came through. Weak, distorted, but human. "Any survivors? This is Haven. Repeat, this is Haven Settlement. We are under attack." The signal cut briefly, then returned. Flooded infected moving downriver, hundreds, maybe thousands. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. The flood. The river had carried the infected farther than they expected. And now another settlement was paying the price. The voice came through again. "If anyone can hear this, we need help." Then the signal went silent. The forest became very quiet. Marcus looked at the others. "Haven is downstream." Elena understood immediately. "That means the flood we created." Marcus nodded slowly. "Is heading straight for them." The night passed slowly. Marcus barely slept. The message from Haven kept replaying in his head. The dam explosion had saved them, but it had also unleashed something terrible downriver. At first light, the group packed the gear. Cold mountain air filled the clearing as the trucks started again. Daniel checked the map they had taken from the dam office. "Haven should be about 60 kilometers from here," he said. "Down in the valley." Marcus looked toward the mountains ahead. "We'll have to descend through the old logging roads." Elena frowned. "Those roads haven't been used in years." Marcus shrugged. "Neither has the world." The convoy moved slowly through the forest trails. Broken branches scraped against the trucks. The path twisted between steep slopes and deep ravines. By midday they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Marcus climbed out and lifted the binoculars. The river below had changed. What used to be a narrow stream was now a massive, muddy flood cutting through the valley like a scar. Trees had been ripped from the ground. Fields were underwater. Entire sections of the road were gone. But that wasn't the worst part. Marcus adjusted the focus. Something was moving in the water. Hundreds of shapes drifted in the current. Bodies. Some were floating face down. Some were tangled in branches. And some were still moving. Elena climbed beside him and looked through the binoculars. Her face went pale. Oh my God. The infected were being carried by the river like cargo. Dozens smashed into rocks or trees, but many kept drifting downstream. Straight toward Haven. Marcus lowered the binoculars slowly. They're not just attacking the settlement. He pointed toward the river. The river itself is bringing them. Daniel stepped forward. So what do we do? Marcus stared at the valley for a long moment. Then he made the decision. We get there before the flood does. By late afternoon the convoy reached the valley floor. The road here was worse than anything they had seen before. Mud covered everything. Sections of asphalt had cracked and collapsed into deep holes where the floodwater had torn through. They had to abandon one of the trucks almost immediately. The road simply couldn't support the weight. Marcus transferred the most important supplies into the remaining vehicle and the SUV. Two vehicles are easier to hide anyway, he said. The air smelled like rot. As they drove closer to the river, the smell became unbearable. Then they saw it. The water was full of bodies. Some were dead, but many were not. The infected clawed at the riverbanks as the current dragged them forward. Some managed to pull themselves onto land. Marcus stopped the vehicle. Everyone out. They climbed onto a small hill overlooking the river. In the distance they could see structures. Walls. Watchtowers. Haven. A real settlement. Maybe 100 buildings surrounded by wooden barricades and steel scrap. Smoke rose from chimneys. People were still alive there. But along the outer walls, movement was already beginning. The first infected pulled themselves from the water and began stumbling toward the settlement. Daniel whispered, "They're already here." Marcus watched the river. More bodies were coming. Hundreds more. If the settlement didn't prepare, they would be overwhelmed within hours. Marcus turned back to the group. "We warn them." Elena grabbed the radio and began broadcasting. "Haven Settlement, this is a survivor convoy approaching from the north. You have a massive infected wave coming down the river." For a moment there was only static. Then a voice answered, "This is Haven, identify yourselves." Marcus took the radio. "My name is Marcus. We destroyed the dam upstream." Silence. Then the voice returned. "That was you." Marcus looked at the river again. "Yes." Another pause. Then the voice said something that made everyone uneasy. "Then you'd better get here fast." The gates of Haven opened just before sunset. Two guards with rifles waved the convoy inside. Marcus drove through quickly. The settlement was bigger than he expected. Old houses, farm buildings, and storage warehouses had been surrounded with barricades made from cars, metal sheets, and shipping containers. Solar panels covered the rooftops. Wind turbines turned slowly above the walls. These people had rebuilt something. But now panic was spreading through the streets. Men and women ran between buildings carrying weapons, fuel cans, and boxes of ammunition. A tall man with gray hair approached Marcus as he stepped out of the vehicle. "I'm Harris," he said. "Leader of Haven." Marcus shook his hand. "You heard the radio?" Harris nodded. "We've been seeing them come out of the river for an hour now." A loud bang echoed from the outer wall. Gunfire followed. One of the guards shouted from the tower, "They're coming." Marcus climbed the ladder to the watchtower and looked out. The riverbank was crawling with movement. Infected bodies were dragging themselves from the mud by the dozens. More were floating down the river every minute. Harris joined him and looked through a scope. "How many do you think?" he asked. Marcus answered quietly, "Too many." The first wave slammed against the outer barricades. Gunfire erupted across Haven. Elena and Daniel rushed to help the defenders. Marcus watched the horizon. The sun was setting. Darkness would come soon. And with it, the real horde. The first hour of fighting went well. The defenders of Haven were experienced. They shot carefully. They conserved ammunition. Every infected that reached the wall was quickly eliminated. But the river kept bringing more. By midnight the ground outside the settlement was covered with bodies. And still they came. Marcus ran along the barricade helping wherever he could. A group of infected managed to climb over a section of wrecked cars. He swung his axe, dropping 2 of them before they could reach the defenders. Elena fired 3 quick shots beside him. But the pressure kept building. More infected were pushing against the barricades. The wood began to crack. Metal panels bent inward. Marcus heard something he didn't like. Splintering. He turned toward the western wall. A large section of the barricade suddenly collapsed under the weight of dozens of infected. "They're through," someone screamed. The infected poured into Haven like a flood. Gunfire erupted across the settlement. People ran in every direction. Marcus grabbed his rifle. "Fall back to the center." But he knew something now. This battle wasn't just about survival. If Haven fell, the valley would lose one of the last safe places left. The survivors regrouped near the center of the settlement. Cars were pushed together to create a final defensive line. Marcus climbed onto one of the vehicles and looked toward the broken wall. The infected were flooding through the gap. Hundreds of them. But Haven's defenders stood the ground. Gunfire echoed through the night. Elena fought beside Marcus. Daniel reloaded magazines as fast as he could. Harris rallied his people behind the barricade. The battle raged for nearly an hour. Then something changed. The flow of infected began to slow. The river had finally carried the last of them downstream. The survivors kept firing until the final infected collapsed. Slowly, silence returned. Smoke drifted across the settlement. Bodies covered the ground. Marcus looked around. Haven had survived. But barely. Harris climbed onto the barricade beside him. "You saved us," he said. Marcus shook his head. "No." He looked toward the dark river. "This was our fault." Harris followed his gaze. "Maybe." Then he said something unexpected. "But you also brought us something we haven't had in years." Marcus frowned. "What?" Harris smiled slightly. "Fighters. If you survived this far into the story, you're one of the real survivors. Haven may have survived tonight, but the world outside the walls is still full of danger. In the next episode, Marcus and the group will discover something hidden beneath the valley, something that may change everything. So make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.